Order. Statement, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster. We've heard 53 backbenchers. We must move on to the next statement. Statement, the Chancellor, Mr. Michael Gove.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This is the first time that I have appeared at the dispatch box since I moved on from the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank the superb team of civil servants at that department who do so much to improve the lives of so many across this country. And with your permission, Mr. Speaker, I would like to make a statement about preparations for our departure from the EU. More than 3 years ago, in the biggest exercise in democracy in our country's history, the British people voted to leave the European Union. But so far, this Parliament has failed to honour that instruction. Now, our Prime Minister has made clear that we must leave by October the 31st. And so we must. Trust in this House depends on it, and trust in our democracy depends on it. Now, of course, this government is determined to secure our departure with a good deal, one that paves the way for a bright future outside the single market and the customs union. And the response that the Prime Minister has received from European leaders shows that they are ready to move. They want a deal too. And they are moving because the Prime Minister has been clear that matters must be resolved by October the 31st. If we drift, then the incentive on them to deliver will quickly dissipate. So I hope that my colleagues in the House of Commons will give the Prime Minister the time and the space he needs to pursue the opening he has secured and to get a good deal that we can all support. But of course we must be prepared for every eventuality. The European Union may not change its position sufficiently before October the 31st. It may be that a deal is not secured. So we must be ready to leave without a deal on October the 31st. Now, leaving without a deal does not mean that talks with our European partners end altogether. In those circumstances, after we depart without a deal in place, we will all want to discuss how we can reach new arrangements on trade and other issues. But while those conversations go on, we must ensure that we are ready for life outside the EU as a third country trading on WTO terms. Now, there has been extensive speculation about what leaving without a deal might mean for businesses and individuals. Moving to a new set of customs procedures, adjusting to new borders checks, and dealing with new tariffs all pose significant challenges. And nobody can be blithe or blasé about the challenges that we face or the scale of work required. But, provided the right preparations are undertaken by government, business and individuals, risks can be mitigated, significant challenges can be met, and we can be ready. Leaving without a deal is, of course, not an event whose consequences are unalterable. It's a change for which we can all prepare, and our preparations will determine the impact of the change, and they will help us also to take advantage of the opportunities which exist outside the EU. We have, of course, to prepare for every eventuality, and that is the function of Operation Yellowhammer. It is an exercise in anticipating what a reasonable worst-case scenario might involve, and how we can then mitigate any risks. Operation Yellowhammer assumptions are not a prediction of what is likely to happen. They are not a base-case scenario or a list of probable outcomes. They are projections of what may happen in a worst-case scenario, and they are designed to help government take the necessary steps to ensure that we can all be ready in every situation. And since the new government was formed at the end of July, new structures have been put in place to ensure that we can be ready in every situation, and we can also accelerate our preparations for exit. 2 new cabinet committees have been set up, XS and XO, to discuss negotiating strategy and to make operational decisions about exit respectively. XO meets every working day to expedite preparations for exit, and we're in regular contact with our colleagues in the devolved administrations, including the Northern Ireland Civil Service, and thousands of the best civil servants across the UK are working to assure the smoothest possible exit. And we've all been helped by the Chancellor's move to double BrExit funding for this year, announcing an additional £2.1 billion on top of expenditure already committed. So £6.3 billion in total has been allocated to prepare for life outside the European Union. And that money is being used to provide practical help to businesses and to individuals. Guaranteeing the effective flow of goods across our border with the EU is, of course, central to our preparations. And that will require action by businesses to adjust to new customs procedures and, of course, intervention by government to ensure the freest flow of traffic to our ports. That's why HMRC has announced an additional expenditure of £16 million to train thousands of customs staff, traders and hauliers, so that trade with the EU continues as smoothly as possible. And it's also why today we're announcing £20 million more to ensure traffic can flow freely in Kent and trucks arriving at Dover are ready to carry our exports into the EU. On business, we've automatically allocated an Economic Operator Registration Indicator, or EORI number, to 88,000 companies across the UK, and businesses can also register for Transitional Simplified Procedures, TSPs, to delay the submissions of customs declarations and postpone the payments of duties. New transit sites have been built in Kent to smooth the flow of goods into the EU, and we're also recruiting 1,000 new staff to help maintain security and to support flows at the border. So government will do all it can to support businesses to get ready, but many of the steps required to ensure the smooth flow of trade fall to business. We will provide advice, finance and flexibility over how revenue payments may be settled. But it's important that businesses familiarise themselves with the new requirements that exit will involve. That's why we've launched a public information campaign, Get Ready for Brexit, to give everyone the clear actions they need to prepare. As well as TV and radio advertising, there is now a straightforward step-by-step checker tool available on the government's website, gov.uk/Brexit, so all of us can identify quickly what we may need to do to get ready. And government has also acted to provide assurance that businesses and individuals can have the maximum level of confidence about the future. We've signed continuity agreements with countries covering over £90 billion in trade. We've got replacement civil nuclear energy trading agreements with Canada, America, Australia and the IAEA. We have secured aviation agreements with 14 countries, including the US and Canada, and we also have arrangements with the EU on aviation, on roads and on rail to ensure smooth travel between the UK and European nations. We also have arrangements on education exchanges, social security, fisheries, climate change and a number of other areas. It's also the case that agreements are in place covering financial services so that transactions can continue to take place and financial and market stability can be underpinned. And of course we have a robust legal framework in place. 6 exit-related bills which cater for different scenarios have been passed, and government has also laid over 580 EU exit secondary instruments. Now, of course, the government is also determined to ensure that we protect the rights of both UK nationals in the EU and EU citizens in the UK. And I personally want to thank the over 3 million EU citizens living and working here for their positive contribution to our society. You are our friends, our family and our neighbours. We want you to stay. We value your presence. And under the EU settlement scheme, over 1 million EU citizens have already been granted status. So let me be clear, EU citizens and their family members will continue to be able to work, study and access benefits and services in the UK on the same basis as now after we exit the EU. And of course, the government will do everything in our power to make sure that UK nationals can continue to live in the EU as they do now. But the government cannot protect the rights of UK nationals unilaterally. We welcome the fact that Member States have drafted or enacted legislation to protect the rights of UK nationals. And today we are calling on Member States to go further and to fully reciprocate our generous commitment to EU citizens so that UK nationals can get the certainty that they deserve. Now, of course, there are other decisions that the EU and Member States have said they will take, which will have an impact on us all if we leave without a deal. The EU's commitment that we will be subject to their common external tariff in a no-deal scenario will impose new costs, particularly on those who export food to Europe. And indeed, the EU's current approach to the rules of the single market will require, as things stand, the Republic of Ireland to impose new checks on goods coming from Northern Ireland. We, for our part, will do everything that we can to support the Belfast Agreement, to ensure the free flow of goods into Northern Ireland and to mitigate the impacts on Northern Ireland, including providing targeted support for our agriculture sector and for Northern Ireland's economy. Now, of course, while there are risks that we must deal with, there are also opportunities for life outside the EU. We can reform government procurement rules. We can get a better deal for taxpayers. We can forge new trade relationships. We can innovate more energetically in pharmaceuticals and life sciences. We can develop crops that yield more food and contribute to better environmental outcomes. We can manage our seas and fisheries in a way which revives coastal communities, and we can restore our oceans to health. We can introduce an immigration policy that is fairer, more efficient and more humane. We can improve our border security. We can deal better with human trafficking. We can deal better with organised crime. We can open new freight ports across this country to boost undervalued communities, and we can support business more flexibly than ever before. There are undoubted risks and real challenges in leaving without a deal on October the 31st, but there are also opportunities and new possibilities for our country outside the EU. It's my job to mitigate those risks, overcome those challenges, and enable this country to exploit those opportunities and extend to every citizen those new possibilities. That is why I commend this statement to the House, and why I am confident that as a nation our best days lie ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it's the first opportunity I've had to congratulate the Honourable Right Honourable Member for his appointment. He may regard it as a poisoned chalice, but no doubt the Prime Minister felt it was appropriate that he took it. And I thank the Minister for his courtesy in providing advance sight of the statement, which was rather vacuous, but we did have a good chance to study it carefully. He makes much of the work that's been carried out by civil servants, working under intense pressure, preparing businesses, individuals and the wider society for Brexit. We acknowledge the very hard work of all those civil servants. We thank them for their service and we welcome the work which the government's doing in that respect. But the truth is, though, that £6.3 billion is being spent on Brexit preparations, and yet it's too little now because it's too late. And even if all the preparations had been carried out in time and in a more comprehensive way, the country still has no idea whether we're going to leave with a deal or with no deal. So let me come straight to the point, because there are significant omissions in the Minister's statement. No mention, for example, of medical supplies, but in the last 24 hours, serious health leaders have warned that no deal could result directly in medical shortages, affect treatment for UK nationals in Europe, and exacerbate the already difficult NHS crisis. And it's been reported, hasn't it, Mr. Speaker, that the government is now stockpiling body bags because of concerns that there may be an increase in the mortality rate. Can the Minister assure the House that this is not the case, and if it is, will he explain what he's doing about it? And the statement makes mention of 1 million EU citizens who have been given settled status. We welcome it, but there are over 3 million in the House, and the government's prevarication over time and its inadequate preparations right from the beginning has caused great anxiety and left millions of people who live here, pay tax here, made their lives here, have their children here, all wondering what their future holds. And it's a mark of the slow progress, Mr. Speaker, that's being made that they still haven't resolved the status of UK citizens, as the Minister stated, who are living in Europe. Now, he talks about getting businesses ready. Yet it's only a few weeks ago that the serious-minded business leaders demanded an independent inquiry into what a no-deal Brexit would actually consist of, amid accusations that vital information about potential problems was deliberately being held back by the government. That's the business community itself. And in the early part of his statement, the Minister makes much of trust in this House and in democracy, but the truth is, the government's playing fast and loose, both with democracy and with the House. I say this because of the proposal that the House be prorogued and that the Prime Minister's staff are now hinting at a possible cynical general election. One way or another, which we are ready for, but one way or another, they are set on closing this House of Commons down for weeks when the country is facing one of the most difficult times in our recent history. And if there is an election, and here's a very important point, if there is an election, the direction of the country will be hotly debated, and its relationship with the EU. We and the country will need full access to all of the relevant information. Now, the Minister's statement conceals more than it reveals. But can he confirm that during an election period or during a prorogation period, whichever it is, that the civil service preparations for Brexit will continue, if necessary, through the election purdah. And if during the purdah, ministers will continue to provide political guidance to civil servants on Brexit. And if that is the case, I give notice now that we as the opposition will seek immediate access to the civil service and ask to be fully informed of all the information which the House has been denied and the country about all such developments, as is the Convention. And that request must begin the minute an election is called. Now, just 8 weeks ago, the current Prime Minister told his party in the country that the chances of a no-deal Brexit were 1,000,000 to 1 against. Yet this morning, the former Chancellor, I see he's not in his place now, stated that there is no progress. There are no substantive negotiations going on. Is that true? The two positions can't be easily reconciled. Either they are or they aren't. And listening to the Prime Minister in the chamber just now, most people still have no idea. To most informed observers, however, it appears that the government's favoured deal, whatever they say, is no deal. And so let's listen to the Minister's own words from earlier this year. This very same Minister, he said, quote, "Leaving without a deal would undoubtedly cause economic turbulence." Almost everyone, he said, accepts that. And then he went on to say, "We didn't vote to leave without a deal." That was the man who led the whole Brexit debate from the point of view of trying to Brexit. He was for May's deal. He was against a no deal. But now he's a minister for no deal. How does he reconcile the progress of his career? And so I say to him, the House must be allowed to see the detailed assessments contained in the Yellowhammer dossier. The truth is, he's hiding it, but why? Because the media reports that Yellowhammer Papers, even the watered-down version that he's working on, portray such a disastrous picture of the country under no deal that the government dare not publish them. Yet, shockingly, leaked excerpts talk of potential shortages, delays, even protests on the streets. And is it not a disgrace that they intend to close Parliament down for 5 weeks without allowing the House to scrutinise the government's detailed programme for no deal? Members have a right to know what the government's preparations are, as does the country. After all, it was him who said, quote, "We are in a parliamentary democracy," he said. And listen to this, Mr. Speaker. He went on to say, "and proroguing Parliament in order to try to get a no deal through would be wrong." Those were his exact words. But that is precisely what they're now trying to do. How can he justify the amount of resources being spent on no deal with no scrutiny or accountability from the House? It's simply unacceptable. And under normal purdah rules, by the way, select committees looking at Brexit preparations and Yellowhammer may also be suspended, leaving absolutely no scrutiny by the House and by members of the government's plans. So when it comes to Yellowhammer, the media appears to be better formed than the House. Let me ask him briefly some questions.
I mean, in a sentence or two, but no more. No, order. The honourable gentleman's well in excess of his time. He can ask 2 or 3 questions, but it needs to be in a sentence. Thank you. John Trickett.
What assessment has he received about disruption to the ports? What assessment has been made and reported to him of the situation in Ireland? And will he confirm what assessment he's had of the impact of no deal on food prices? All of these matters must be addressed, Mr. Speaker, by this House in a full. Let him place the documents in the Library of the House of Commons so we can all explore it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for his questions. I'm also grateful for him asking me how do I reconcile the progress of my career. It's a question my wife asks me every night, and I'm grateful to him for repeating it. But I have enormous respect and affection for the honourable gentleman. We both represent constituencies that voted to leave, and both of us are also impatient to see us leave the European Union. When a Brexit delay was suggested in January 2019, the honourable gentleman said, "It sounds once more like the British establishment is doing what it always does, which is ignoring the views of millions of ordinary folk, and that is something I am not prepared to tolerate." Comrade, neither am I, which is why we have to leave on October the 31st. Now, The honourable gentleman also said that civil servants are doing a fantastic job in preparation, and I join him in paying tribute to the work that civil servants are doing. He asked about medical shortages. Medical shortages can sometimes sadly occur whether we're in or out of the European Union, as we've seen recently with the HRT shortage, which my right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, is doing so much to help to counter. But it is a shared issue for all of us. 2/3 of the medical supplies which reach the Republic of Ireland pass through the narrow straits. That is why it is so important that we secure a deal, not just in order to safeguard our superb NHS, but also to help those citizens in Ireland who are our brothers and sisters too. It is also the case that the honourable gentleman asked us about the EU settled status scheme. He made the point that 1 million people have received status so far and asked about progress. Every day 15,000 more people are applying. The settled status scheme is working, and he is absolutely right. Now is the time for our European partners to extend the same generosity to UK citizens as we are extending to EU citizens. He also talks about the money being spent. At the beginning of his questions, he said £6.3 billion was too little, too late, and then subsequently, at the end of his statement, he said, how can we justify such expenditure? The fastest U-turn, I think, in history in the course of just 6 minutes. He also talked about our contemplation of a cynical general election. But I thought it was the policy of the opposition, certainly the Leader of the Opposition, to welcome a general election at the earliest possible opportunity. I see the Leader of the Opposition seeking guidance on this question from the Speaker. I'll leave the House to decide.
Order. I know the Minister won't want to mislead the House. The right honourable gentleman was simply alerting me to his experience of visiting Romania, which is somewhat tangential to, indeed entirely divorced from, the ruminations and the product of the Secretary of State's or the Minister of the Cabinet Office lucubrations, which we don't need. Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And we all know how much the Leader of the Opposition enjoyed seeing Celtic play in Romania. But the other point that the right honourable gentleman asked me about was the extent of our negotiations, and they are extensive. It has been the case that the Prime Minister, my right honourable friend, the Exit Secretary, and his Sherpa have been visiting every single European capital in order to make sure that we can advance our negotiations. But one thing is critical. If we are to succeed in these negotiations, we need to get behind the Prime Minister. And if it is the case that the motion before the House is passed tonight and the legislation which it gives effect to is passed tomorrow, then we will allow the European Union to dictate the length of any extension and to put any conditions they wish to on that extension. That would totally undermine the government's capacity to negotiate in the national interest. It has been said in the past of some that they sent out the captain to the wicket and broke his bat beforehand. Well, it is the case that Labour's approach to negotiations is not just breaking the bat, it is blowing up the whole pavilion. But it is no surprise that Labour want to sabotage our negotiations because they also want to sabotage their own negotiations. Labour's policy on negotiation is to have an infinitely long extension, to negotiate a new deal with Europe, to bring it back to this country, and then to argue that people should vote against that deal and vote to remain. How can we possibly have confidence in the Leader of the Opposition to negotiate in Europe when his own party don't have confidence in him to secure a good deal for the British people?
Flaming Green.
Those of us who live in East Kent, where the efficient operation of the Dover-Calais route is essential for the smooth running of our entire road network, have a particular reason to wish my right honourable friend well in his new task, particularly if we end up with the very undesirable outcome of a no-deal Brexit. In that spirit, I welcome the extra 20 million he's announced today to ensure increasingly smooth running of the road network. But can he tell the House what arrangements HMRC has put in place for customs clearance of lorries coming into this country, and specifically, where is that going to happen?
Well, my right honourable friend makes a very good point. And, of course, there are two aspects to this, both lorries coming into this country and lorries leaving this country. When it comes to lorries coming into this country, thanks to the application of transition simplified procedures, it will be the case that any duty that needs to be paid can be deferred. And, of course, we will be prioritising flow over revenue, which means that we will not be imposing new checks, certainly in the first months after any no-deal exit. I agree with him that a no-deal exit is undesirable. For lorries which are leaving this country, there will be 6 new transit sites, 5 in Kent and 1 in Essex, in order to ensure that the Common Transit Convention and its provisions can be taken advantage of by those hauliers who are leaving the UK.
Mr. Speaker, can I put on record my thanks to the officials who have been given the impossible task of trying to make sense of this government's plans and something they should never have been asked to do over no deal. Today really is, the member may laugh, but these officials are working incredibly hard because of the ineptitude of the government opposite. Today, in Holyrood, we see a tale of two governments. Today, when we've got the programme for government, tackling a climate emergency, improving public services, and introducing a fairer economy by the Scottish Government, yet here we debate food shortages, medicine stockpiling, price increases and job losses, when the height of government ambition is hoping that it won't be as bad as the experts tell them it will be. Now, the Secretary of State talked about a general election. We welcome a general election. And in fact, Mr Speaker, I'm going to take the unusual step of inviting the Secretary of State to come and campaign in my constituency. I'd love him to come and campaign in my constituency so people can question why he's putting them out of work, why he's hitting our food and drink industry, and why he's hitting our university sector. This is the height of political failure, and it was only apt that he quoted Geoffrey Howe earlier on, who of course was attacking his own Prime Minister during an ongoing Tory civil war. I've noticed that nobody's arguing that this is a good idea anymore. This is a government with no idea what they're doing and making it up as they go along. No wonder they want to duck, dive and dodge any kind of scrutiny whatsoever. Now, before we were warned that Parliament would need to sit, and does he agree with the Health Secretary that prorogation goes against everything that those men who waded onto those beaches in Normandy fought and died for? He liked to quote others. Does he still agree with that? Can he tell me on food prices what the impact will be on food banks and the most vulnerable, already hit by austerity by this disastrous Tory government? What kind of level of medicine shortages is acceptable to the government? On the £6.5 billion, from which public services are they to be taken? And finally, and I can't quite believe I'm asking this question, Mr Speaker, does the Secretary of State still believe in the rule of law? And will he accept laws passed by this Parliament?
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Can I welcome the right honourable gentleman to his position? Can I also say that I'm very grateful to his invitation to campaign in his constituency at the next general election, given that he has a majority of just 2. He is a brave as well as a principled man. He asks about... I think my honourable friend is right. In Crail and Anstruther, as well as in St Andrews, I think they're looking forward to Conservative representation in North East Fife in due course. He talks about a tale of two governments. It is the case that even as the Scottish Government is unveiling its programme today, it is unveiling its programme after 10 years in government, with education standards declining, the number of people in the health service, including doctors, declining, and unfortunately, as the recent JERS figures show, Scotland, were it an independent country, would have the biggest deficit of any nation in Europe. Hardly a record of success. He asks about prorogation. It is the case that prorogation is necessary before every Queen's speech. One can no more be against prorogation in order to ensure a Queen's speech than one can be against the functioning of this Parliament properly constituted. He asks about food prices. It is the case that, of course, food prices fluctuate. Some go up, some go down. But the temporary tariff schedule that we have put in place will protect consumers and will ensure that in many cases food prices are either stable or drop. But ultimately, the problem for the honourable gentleman is that the Scottish National Party may talk about democracy, but we have 2 major referenda in this country, both of which they seek to overturn. They want to ignore the vote to stay in the United Kingdom, they want to ignore the vote to leave the European Union, and their policy is to take us back into the EU. That would mean abandoning the pound, abandoning coastal communities in Scotland, and once more recognising that the Scottish National Party wants separatism and Brussels rule ahead of a strong United Kingdom and the benefits that it brings to the citizens of the whole UK.
Sir Mike Penning.
Would the Secretary of State agree with me, but trust in this Parliament and trust in politicians is the most important thing in any democracy? And any party that goes out on a manifesto and says they want to leave the European Union and honour that can't be trusted ever again in government.
Well, my right honourable friend makes a very, very good point. On page 24 of the Labour Party's manifesto in 2017, the Labour Party was committed to leaving the European Union and respecting the referendum, and the overwhelming majority, not all, of members on those benches voted for Article 50, which set as the legal default date departure from the European Union this year. I absolutely respect the rule of law, and so should the members on the opposite benches who voted to leave the EU.
Tom Brake.
Speaker, there are widespread reports that the Minister is seeking to sanitise the Operation Yellowhammer documents. Can he confirm that any ministerial demand that civil servants water down Operation Yellowhammer would break the ministerial code? No civil servants risk being disciplined if they refuse to undertake this work, and they will be covered by whistleblower legislation.
Well, can I thank the honourable gentleman for his question? Of course it is the case that we want to make sure that any documents that we publish accurately reflect the range of possibilities that leaving the European Union might entail. And it is the case that there are thousands of pages of information which were published in the technical notices that my right honourable friend published when he was Exit Secretary. It's also the case on gov.uk//Brexit. There is much information about what leaving the European Union would entail. He specifically refers to the Yellowhammer document. The point about the Yellowhammer document is that it is an aid to ministers in order to ensure that we can deal with a reasonable worst-case scenario, and of course the assumptions in that Yellowhammer document are arrived at independently by civil servants, and rightly so.
Daniel Kuczynski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The BBC are constantly engaging with Polish diaspora groups in this country to accentuate potential problems over the EU resettlement scheme. Could the Secretary of State give me an assurance of what money has been afforded to ensure that the maximum number of EU citizens are processed as quickly and as efficiently as possible in the event of a no deal?
Well, my honourable friend makes a very good point. He's a consistent champion for the rights of Polish people in the UK and elsewhere. The largest single community of EU citizens in our country is comprised of Polish citizens. We're remembering earlier the anniversary of the Second World War. We honour the sacrifice of those Polish soldiers, airmen and sailors who fought alongside us for democracy, and it is our moral duty to ensure that Polish citizens in this country are given the opportunity to stay and to enjoy the rights of which we are all proud and for which their forebears fought so proudly.
Catherine McKinnell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A no-deal Brexit, according to government messaging, is something we can completely prepare for as long as we spend enough money on the advertising, whilst at the same time being so crucial and so fundamental that it must be kept on the table as part of the negotiations. It can't be both. Which is it? Absolutely right.
I thank the right honourable lady for her question. It is the case that the legal default position is that we leave on October the 31st. If the EU will not move and we do not secure a good deal, then we need to be prepared for that eventuality. That is the necessary outworking of Article 50, which I think the honourable lady voted for, along with many other colleagues across the House. But it is, if she didn't, then I can only apologise. I think a majority of Labour colleagues did, but I salute her independence of mind on that issue. But the broader point that I would make is that because it is an eventuality for which we have to prepare, it is prudent that we should prepare. But I think one thing that the honourable lady and I agree on is that it is infinitely preferable that we leave with a deal, which is why we should give the Prime Minister the space and time to negotiate, which is why I would hope that she, along with me, would decline to vote for any motion today which would fetter the Prime Minister's discretion.
Mark Borsey.
Last week I visited a logistics business in my constituency sending parcels to the Republic of Ireland. I heard about the concerns of their customers about the needs for paperwork. The business has offered to do it and charge for the time spent, about 20 minutes per form, but I understand that many businesses simply won't bother, and that will lead to a loss of valuable export sales. Clearly the best thing is to keep the existing arrangements, but what further advice can the Minister give to my constituent and his customers?
Well, my honourable friend makes a very, very good point. There are some specific proposals which help deal with parcels of a lower value, which can facilitate their flow across borders. But it is also the case that I would suggest to my right honourable friend's constituents that they contact gov.uk BrExit, the GDS website, or indeed HMRC, and if you would care to write to me, I can make sure that all the facilitations and easements available are in place for his constituency's firms and its employees.
Ben Bradshaw.
Why should anyone believe government claims that there are meaningful talks taking place in Brussels to avoid no deal when the rest of Europe flatly denies that, and the Prime Minister's own Chief of Staff has said that that claim is a deliberate sham to run down the clock to a no-deal Brexit?
Hear, hear.
Well, I have huge respect for the right honourable gentleman, but if it were the case that he were to look at the number of air miles clocked up by my right honourable friend, the Brexit Secretary, if he were to talk to those involved in the negotiations that he, the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister's official negotiator, David Frost, has been involved in, he would see that there has been intensive negotiation with our EU partners. And it was the case, for example, that the Prime Minister just last week spent 5 days in France talking not just to Emmanuel Macron, but to other European leaders in order to make sure that we can leave with a deal.
Andrew Bowie.
36,000 delegates gather in Aberdeen to discuss and debate the future of the energy industry. Can my right honourable friend confirm that plans will be put in place in the event of a no deal to maintain our just-in-time customs model on which that industry and so many others in Scotland depend?
Well, my honourable friend is a brilliant advocate for the oil and gas sector, which does so much to ensure that the north east of Scotland is an economic powerhouse, and it is the case that we're working intensively with those in the energy sector and elsewhere in order to ensure that their business models can be robust for the future.
Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It was reported yesterday that analysis done for the Department of Transport in the last fortnight says that in the worst case, the average delay for lorries and freight at Dover would be 1.5 days, and in the best case, a wait of 2 to 3 hours, either of which would cause chaos. Can the Secretary of State just confirm for the House that the Government has received that analysis, and what has the freight industry had to say to him about it? Because they have been warning for some time they don't think the Government is prepared.
The right honourable gentleman is quite right that representatives of the freight industry have asked us to accelerate preparations for no deal. He's absolutely right about that, and that is something I and my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Transport, have done. I had the opportunity on Friday to visit Calais to talk to ministers and also to the President of the Regional Assembly there. Both of them said that they propose to take a pragmatic approach in order to ensure the maximum flow, and we'll be revisiting those assumptions in the light not just of those talks but the other steps we're taking.
John Stevenson.
Mr. Speaker, farming, food and drinks manufacturing sector matter to the economy of Carlisle and Cumbria. Clearly, the future relations with the EU will also be significant to those industries. Could the Minister confirm that he believes adequate preparations are being made in the eventuality of a no deal to make sure that both those industries will be able to function properly?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right. Two of the sectors that we most need to help and support are, of course, the haulage sector, and that follows on from the question from the right honourable gentleman, and we are moving at pace in order to meet many of their concerns. But it is the case that I said at the dispatch box today, and I have said previously, that the sector which faces some of the biggest challenges in the event of no deal exit is undoubtedly agriculture, and within agriculture, undoubtedly upland farmers, particularly sheep farmers. And it is the case that the Department for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs is working on steps in order to ensure that if, as we anticipate, a common external tariff is placed on sheep meat exports, and therefore the price of sheep meat falls, that we can support hill farmers who do so much for our country to produce high-quality food and to safeguard the environment we love.
I've been contacted by local manufacturers and food producers deeply worried about no-deal tariffs. One, an exporter who says the price of his exports to the EU will go up by 30%, and he called it manufacturing suicide. Another, an importer, the price of his imports will go up by 50%. A third told me they might have to close down altogether. Can he confirm that all of his preparations about public information and committees will not mitigate the impact of those no-deal tariffs? And can he tell the House what is the total cost to British industry of those no-deal tariffs?
The Right Honourable Lady makes a very fair point, actually. The one thing which is the biggest challenge in a no-deal exit is, of course, the existence of those tariffs, a requirement of the European Union's single market rules. Now, it is the case that the common external tariff, as I just alluded to, is particularly high when it comes to the agricultural sector, and therefore when it comes to exporting food into the European Union, that is a significant barrier. It is, however, the case that the temporary tariff regime that we're consulting on would ensure that in many cases tariffs are lower in order to help business and consumers. The broader question about attempting to put a figure on the specific cost, I think you can't do that in isolation, though I do appreciate the sincerity with which the Honourable Lady, Right Honourable Lady asks that question. More broadly, I would welcome the opportunity to talk to the Right Honourable Lady's constituents about what we can do, because it is the case that the Treasury are making money available for companies which are fundamentally viable but may face a particular turbulence in the event of no deal to ensure their survival in the future. So I'd be more than happy to talk to her about that.
in the future, so paying the tariff.
Dependent on the chemical industry. Much of that, of course, has been previously governed by regulation and compliance with the EU. As we leave, what discussions has the Secretary of State had with those companies and with Europe regarding UK REACH and the implementation of it?
My honourable friend makes a very, very important point. Those who work in the chemicals industry are absolutely vital to the health of our economy. Hitherto, the regulation of chemicals within the European Union has been governed by the operation of the REACH directive. We're replicating that in UK law, and we're putting in place, and we have had extensive discussions, steps to ensure that the chemicals industry can continue to manufacture and export as before, but it is one of those industries whose business model, as we leave the European Union, necessarily requires government support in order to ensure its continued health.
I'm grateful, Mr. Speaker. Great mention has been made of the freight industry and the importance of guaranteeing the effective flow of goods across the border. Can you explain what's been done since February with regard to the ISPM measures with regard to wood pallets and the fact that 2/3 of the pallets in this country don't comply with the European Union requirements?
My honourable friend makes a very important point about the nature of wood pallets, and we've been working with the industry in order to ensure that we can mitigate the consequences of that.
Luke Graham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, earlier today, the chairman of the BMA in Scotland went on record to say that there are shortages of medical supplies in Scotland due to Brexit. Can my honourable friend give assurances that this is not the case and that the Cabinet Office is engaging directly with the devolved administration, local government and all government bodies to make sure no shortages are caused by Brexit?
Well, it would be. My honourable friend makes a very, very important point. To the anguish of many, but to the joy of some, we haven't actually left the European Union yet, so it would be hard to see how any shortages could be caused by Brexit. But it is the case that the Department of Health and Social Care and others have worked in order to ensure that in the event of a no-deal Brexit, that we can continue to have all the medicines and medical supplies that people need. I will look closely at what the Scottish BMA have said and investigated, but it is sometimes the case that there are one or two, I'm sure it's not the case with the Scottish BMA, there are one or two figures who sometimes attribute to Brexit responsibility for matters which are absolutely nothing to do with our departure from the European Union.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister caused some concern on the weekend about whether the government would actually comply with legislation if it were passed, if it were enacted. So can he, without dodging the question, just confirm that if the law requires Her Majesty's Government to request an extension to Article 50, that the Government will comply with the law?
The Government always complies with the law.
Scotman.
Is the Secretary of State confident that the integrity of our fishing waters can be maintained and enforced regardless of our method of leaving the European Union? And can he give the Cornish fishermen an assurance on that point?
It is a very important point, and steps have been taken, including working with the devolved administrations, to make sure that we have strong maritime security and the rights of our fishermen can be respected. But of course we want to work in a cooperative way with other European countries, and indeed countries outside the European Union like Norway and of course the Faroes, in order to ensure that we can manage stocks sustainably and also revive coastal communities.
Ruth George.
In reports in the newspaper that reunification of families will cease if we leave the European Union without a deal, will the Secretary of State give clarification of the government's position on this and confirm that all children who are stranded without family who are in the UK will be able to apply as now under the Dublin Agreement to be able to be reunified with their families?
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady for raising that question. I'm disturbed by reporting to that effect, and it is the case that the rights of EU citizens in this country and of course the dependents will be protected. But if the Honourable Lady wants to furnish me with the report to which she refers, I'll look closely into it and of course write to her.
Thanks, Chalk.
Speaker, it would be infinitely preferable to secure a deal, which is why I and many honourable members have voted 3 times to do exactly that. But can my right honourable friend assure me that in any circumstances, security of supply of medicines will be assured and that those medicines will be flown into the UK if necessary?
Well, my honourable friend, as ever, makes two characteristically acute points. I voted for the withdrawal agreement on every opportunity that was presented to this House. I had hoped that more colleagues on opposition benches would have done so. I'm grateful to those colleagues on opposition benches who have done so, because it's infinitely preferable if we leave with a deal. But my honourable friend is also right that, as well as making sure that we can have the freest possible flow of goods, including medicines, over the short straits, it is also the case that there is additional capacity, both at sea and in the air, to safeguard citizens in this country.
Dr. Philippa Whitford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. For the last couple of years, I, along with the President of the Royal College of Radiologists, have been raising the issue of radioisotopes. I was ignored and patronised, and then reassured at the beginning of this year that it was all sorted and they'd been flown in. But on the 23rd of July, a new contract has been put out to tender with a closing date last week, which means it's not sorted at all. So could he possibly explain to us what is going to happen about radioisotopes on the 1st of November?
I would hope that no one would ignore or patronise the honourable lady, who has a very, even before she came to this House, a very, very distinguished record as a physician. And she speaks with great authority on these issues. Unless I misunderstand her point refers to the fact that the Department for Transport has issued a new tender for sea freight. That tender, I understand, has been well subscribed, and we should have sea freight in place. We will also additionally have air freight in place, as I mentioned in response to my honourable friend, in order to ensure that not just radioisotopes, but that all medical supplies necessary for the effective functioning of the NHS across the United Kingdom are in place. But I hope to stay in regular touch with the honourable lady, because her commitment to the health of our NHS is second to none.
Steve Bryan.
Thank my colleague for his time to meet me during recess and the statement today. And can I just return to the issue of medicine supply? So one constituent wrote to me recently asking about her epilepsy medication, and she said to me, if we cannot get it easily, it will tip my life upside down. So she and I, as her MP, we don't need ifs and buts, we don't need scare stories, we just need hard facts. This is not a nice to have and we'll do our best to have in the awful event of a no-deal Brexit. This is an absolutely critical. We need categorical assurance from the Minister at the dispatch box that there will not be a shortage of medicine supply, in addition to the shortages that there are at the moment, and I know that as a former Minister in the Department, after Brexit.
My right honourable friend was a brilliant health minister, and he knows that medical supplies have been termed Category 1 goods, and as I mentioned earlier, as well as making sure that we have the freest possible flow across the short straits, there is additional naval freight or maritime freight capacity and air capacity in order to ensure that those vital drugs will be in place. So I can reassure himself and also his constituent, those who are living with epilepsy need that medicine. It will be there.
Paul Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Having previously worked as a supermarket fruit and vegetable assistant, I know how perishable and fragile those supply chains are. So I was surprised to hear the Minister on Sunday describe a no-deal Brexit as causing no shortage of fresh food. And sure enough, soon afterwards, the British Retail Consortium and the Northern Irish Retail Consortium said it quite simply isn't true, and it's impossible to fully mitigate, as stockpiling is not possible with such perishable produce. So will the Minister accept that his statement on Sunday was actually inaccurate?
Well, can I also express my solidarity with the honourable gentleman? I too worked with fresh fruit and vegetables when I was a food hall porter in the Aberdeen branch of British Home Stores in the 1980s, so I absolutely appreciate how important it is to make sure that we have a ready supply of fresh fruit and vegetables, and a wide range of them. Now, it is the case, of course, that the British Retail Consortium, with whom I have worked, have been working incredibly hard in order to make sure that we have access to the full range of foods that we currently enjoy, and it is the case that, of course, while the price of some commodities may rise, the price of other commodities may fall, but I'm absolutely certain that consumers will continue to have a wide choice of quality fresh foodstuffs in the event of no-deal Brexit.
Grant.
Much, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure my right honourable friend will agree with me that business leaders and business associations will be listening intently to this afternoon's debate. They have suffered 3 years of uncertainty and endless, pointless Brexit debate. What reassurance can the Minister give to these people who have suffered uncertainty? What certainty and what reassurance can you give business leaders going forward?
My own friend is absolutely right. Business wants certainty. The best certainty that we can give is making sure that we secure a good deal with the European Union, which is why I hope everyone across this House will give my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, the time and space necessary to secure that good deal on which he's been working so hard.
Luciana Berger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Further to the question that we just heard about food shortages, the Minister on Sunday said that there will be no shortages of fresh food. He just told us that there will be a wide choice. Does he therefore accept what the British Retail Consortium said, that his initial claim was categorically untrue, and that a no-deal Brexit would be the worst of all worlds for our high streets and those who shop there?
Well, the Honourable Lady, like me, wants to avoid a no-deal Brexit if at all possible, but I think it's important that the work that the British Retail Consortium and other supermarkets and others involved in providing our food have been doing in order to make sure that we have a continuing wide choice and ready supply of the fresh food that we all enjoy.
Sir Desmond Sway.
Earlier in the year, Mr. Speaker, when it appeared momentarily that we might leave without a deal, Mr. Barnier announced that there wouldn't, after all, be a hard border and that other arrangements would be relied upon. Where could you possibly got that idea?
Minister.
I think very possibly from some of the wise and thoughtful speeches that have been made by my right honourable friend.
Yes. Order.